Welcome to NDNU's podcast, where we bring higher education to life through conversations that matter. Tune in as we unpack current trends, explore big ideas, and spotlight voices from across the Notre Dame-Dinnemore University community.
Today we're digging into a really vital discussion about the profound cultural shifts happening because of artificial intelligence. We're drawing our insights from the article, How Corporate Culture is Being Remade by AI, and what that feels like from the inside, which was written by Notre Dame-Dinnemore University's Vice President, Kurt Allen.
And the speed of adoption here is, well, it's undeniable. Kurt's analysis points out that 78% of organizations are now using AI in at least one function. And this widespread use, I think the number was 71% using generative AI regularly, is fundamentally changing how companies operate. So the central question for us today is this: does this intense integration structurally risk flattening corporate culture by just prioritizing speed and output? Or is it just an accelerant that forces companies to finally define and reinforce human values like judgment and accountability?
That really is the essential fault line, isn't it? Are we looking at a technology that by its very nature weakens the human side of corporate culture, or is it just a powerful tool that demands, stronger human governance?
I definitely fall into the latter camp. My perspective is that AI is primarily an accelerator and a mirror. It doesn't create a culture out of thin air. It just forces immediate clarity on the values your organization already has. If your culture already rewards shallow, fast work, AI is going to amplify that. But if you put the right governance and rituals in place, the technology actually forces a pivot toward higher order thinking. It reinforces the need for human judgment. The culture, well, it just follows the framework you build around the tech.
See, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the technology is neutral. I would argue that AI integration carries an inherent structural risk. I mean, the default setting for these systems is speed and efficiency. That naturally pulls a culture toward what you might call an output-first, depth-second mindset. And this creates a very real risk of hollowing out human skills and, frankly, flattening communication. You need to consciously and defensively intervene just to counteract that powerful technological pull.
Okay, let's explore that premise. Because for me, the sheer scale of adoption suggests AI is. It's almost like a utility now. It's inert until governance gives it a direction. With 71% regular Gen AI use and 75% of knowledge workers using it for communication, it's just woven into the fabric of work. So the organizational design choice becomes paramount. And as Kurt notes, culture follows incentives. So when you correctly incentivize things like synthesis and problem framing, AI lifts the burden of the routine stuff and it forces people to focus on high-value thinking.
The problem with that, I think, is that incentivizing synthesis assumes a level of readiness and managerial vision that in the real world often just evaporates in the rush for quarterly results. Speed becomes the path of least resistance, and that leads to some very concrete risks for human capital, especially around on-the-job learning. If AI automates away the routine work, the first drafts, the basic data summaries, then your junior and mid-level employees lose that critical learning process. They miss the context and the iteration that builds real strategic perspective.
I agree the learning path changes, and we should definitely come back to that developmental risk. But let's stick with communication governance for a second, because it's so central to Kurt's observations. When it's implemented strategically, AI forces organizations to define their values and guardrails with really unprecedented clarity. I mean, think about the analytics dashboard example he shared. The cultural win wasn't just the speed of the data. That's the acceleration. The real value came from the governance rituals they applied to it. Joint sense-making sessions, cross-team reviews, requiring annotated comments. These rituals forced interpretation and transparency to become the most valuable part of the process, much more than raw speed.
Okay, but that feels like a very localized success story. I'm worried about the systemic impact when, 75% of communication is being touched by AI in some way. Kurt even mentioned his own experience reviewing an AI-drafted business plan that was, I think his words were, clear and polished, but emotionally flat. Stakeholders can feel that. They can sense a lack of genuine human intent, and that erodes trust. My fundamental worry is that the push for volume creates this AI churn and burn culture. Can we really expect leaders to always be consciously infusing voice and tone into this massive stream of content? Or will a kind of cultural fatigue set in where we just accept sterile, impersonal communication as the norm?
And that tension between volume and nuance, I think that brings us right to our first core contention, the efficacy of these communication guardrails versus this structural tendency toward cultural flatness you're describing.
I think the tendency is structurally baked in. I mean, the sheer velocity of Gen AI output can overwhelm even the best intentions. We're creating a culture where people have to constantly apply a human filter to everything, just searching for the real intent or the missing emotional context. If content is consistently generated by a machine that prioritizes clarity over everything else, the culture suffers. You lose that tacit knowledge. Leaders can write a policy that says review for tone, but the pressure to just hit send, it almost always wins. And that's how flatness becomes institutionalized.
See, I think that premise misunderstands the point of the guardrails. The purpose of things like flagging AI use or mandating human review, it's to force discipline onto that speed. These aren't just, decorative policies. They are essential design elements for a high accountability organization. This is the redesign Kurt calls for. When you do it right, governance becomes a commitment to prioritize quality over raw volume. It forces you to ask, what does empathy sound like for us? What level of attribution is non-negotiable? That clarity actually strengthens the culture.
Okay, but the very need for them is telling, isn't it? If you have to design these expensive, continuous, and highly specific defensive policies just to stop a technology from destroying core human qualities like connection and intent, doesn't that prove the technology is inherently disruptive to human culture?
It suggests AI's pull toward efficiency is so strong that you have to spend all this effort just resisting it. Effort that could be going toward actual innovation.
I would argue that every transformative technology, from the spreadsheet to ERPs, required new cultural norms for accountability. AI is just the latest and maybe the most demanding variable. So the cultural challenge isn't resistance, it's adaptation. And adaptation means integrating these traceability rituals, these guardrails, not as a burden, but as the new standard operating procedure. That's what lets you have speed without sacrificing integrity. Well, the challenge of integrity brings us directly to the second contention, which is role transformation and the, I think, severe risk of losing essential developmental learning.
The shift we are observing, and the one Kurt argues is necessary, is about cultural advancement, not loss. AI forces managers to evolve. They have to stop being overseers of tasks and become expert coaches, developing their teams in judgment, in synthesis, in facilitation. This is what prepares the workforce for that 44% shift in core skills that's expected by 2028. We're not losing capacity, we're upskilling for resilience.
I understand the theory of upskilling, but we have to address the tangible loss for junior employees. If AI takes away the building blocks, the first report draft, the basic data aggregation, those are the tasks that teach you context. When that's automated away, the foundation for understanding strategy just vanishes. How could a manager coach higher order capacities if the employee has zero hands-on experience with a lower order work that informs those decisions? We risk creating a generation of employees who are brilliant prompt engineers but lack the critical thinking that comes from that iterative hands-on process.
That's an interesting point, but it assumes the learning path has to stay the same. I'd frame it differently. The routine tasks were the learning path, but now the learning path involves collaborating with an AI teammate. That's a crucial distinction. The manager's role shifts from assessing task completion to assessing the quality of synthesis. How rigorous was the problem framing? How did they interpret the AI's output? The new hands-on work is learning to spot AI bias, correct its assumptions, and weave its output into a human strategy. That adaptation is the new developmental path.
But the pace of that adaptation is my concern. We're automating foundational tasks at lightning speed, while the managerial culture needed to coach these new skills, that takes years to develop. The organization is running at two speeds. The technology moves at the pace of deployment, and human capacity moves at the pace of slow institutional change. And that gap leaves us with junior staff who are technically proficient but contextually, well, shallow.
But if an organization doesn't adopt its learning pathways, it will become irrelevant. So the cultural choice isn't whether to preserve the old tasks, but how to rapidly institutionalize the new ones. It requires a real commitment to professional development where working with AI is seen as a co-creative process and where the human is always ultimately accountable for the output.
And that accountability leads right to our last point, governance readiness and the threat of shadow AI. If managers are already struggling to coach new skills, how can they possibly govern the technology itself?
That's a legitimate concern about execution, sure.
It's more than execution, it's a cultural vulnerability. Executives are pushing for rapid AI deployment, but Cisco reports major gaps in governance readiness. This vacuum, combined with a huge problem of shadow AI, employees using unsanctioned tools, it just undermines the entire structure of accountability you're talking about. Shadow AI leads to data leaks, inconsistent messaging. It proves that cultural control is already failing.
I'm not convinced shadow AI proves control is failing. I think it proves control is being challenged. Managing it proactively is actually a key cultural strategy. Strong cultures don't just ban tools. That only drives usage underground. They respond by offering safe, compliant alternatives and clear rules for attribution. The solution to governance gaps isn't rejection, it's embedding those traceability rituals from the article. You make discipline and documentation central cultural norms. You turn a crisis of control into an opportunity to strengthen your data hygiene.
But the tech has already outpaced the cultural response. The fact that the workforce is adopting tools so quickly, often exposing the organization to huge risk before managers have even developed the necessary judgment to guide them, that demonstrates a profound vulnerability. The controls are weak. We're deploying tools that demand high accountability while we're operating with low governance readiness. It's a recipe for internal fragmentation and distrust. We're choosing acceleration over stability.
Or maybe the cultural controls were never strong enough to begin with. AI isn't creating this weakness. It's exposing a pre-existing cultural debt, a lack of strong documentation norms, a lack of manager development that was just masked by slower work. AI forces us to either pay that debt by creating rigorous governance or suffer the consequences. The choice to pair AI with discipline isn't an ideal scenario. It's a necessary survival mechanism.
And that necessity, that just underscores the non-neutral nature of the technology itself. We have to exert immense, continuous effort just to prevent cultural decay.
Absolutely. So, to summarize my position, AI is a powerful accelerant. It changes the pace of business, but this speed demands that we explicitly define and reinforce our human values, our systems of accountability, and our communication norms. The technology is a mirror. It shows us where our governance is weak, and by intentionally pairing AI with human judgment and accountability, we can amplify our collective intelligence instead of eroding it.
That is the hope, yes, but the cultural risks, the pull toward hollow communication, the lost learning opportunities, the vulnerability to shadow AI, they are profound and structural. Without constant, rigorous cultural redesign and just conscious vigilance, the default pressure for speed will inevitably overwhelm depth. And that leads to a more brittle, less human-centered corporate culture. We have to be aggressively intentional about protecting that.
The material definitely offers a critical insight here. It reveals that inherent tension between speed and efficiency on one hand and maintaining a durable, human-centered culture on the other. AI acts as both an accelerant and a mirror, and it challenges us to navigate that tension with real purpose.
Indeed. There's clearly much more to explore on how we design human work for this new age of generative intelligence.
Thanks for joining us on the Notre Dame de Número University podcast, where higher education meets real-world insight. If today's conversation on AI in business sparked your interest, explore NDNU's MBA with an AI concentration, designed for leaders ready to shape the future of innovation. Learn more at ndnu.edu or give us a call at 650-508-3600. Classes are enrolling now. See you next time.